The female soldier stared in disbelief at the computer screen before her, which clearly showed that the sun had undergone a strange change. She rushed to report the situation to her superiors, but the officer only glanced at the screen and then instructed her to continue working and forbid her from mentioning it to anyone. Hadisse's heart was filled with fear. The gamma rays from the solar flare were heading towards Earth at an incredible speed. It wouldn't be long before all life on Earth would be completely annihilated. Soon after, Hadisse was urgently summoned to the operations command room, but the high-ranking officials inside did not allow her to participate in the discussion. As the door slowly closed, Hadisse knew that a major crisis must have occurred. After returning to her quarters, Hadisse quickly called her mother, who was hundreds of kilometers away. Hadisse urged her mother to stay in the basement for the next few days, but before she could explain in detail, there was a sudden noise outside, and Hadisse quickly turned off the lights. Hadisse walked to the window and saw two fully armed soldiers had already arrived downstairs. Hadisse instantly realized the seriousness of the situation. She used a table to temporarily block the door, then grabbed her uniform and backpack and fled outside. In her panic, she left her phone on the couch. A few minutes later, the two soldiers forcibly broke through the door, but the room was already empty. Meanwhile, a team of 5 scientists was piloting a small submarine towards the seabed, but before they were halfway through their journey, a dazzling band of light appeared in the deep sea. At this depth, it should have been pitch black. So where did the light beam come from? The pilot, Armin, decided to surface, but when they reached the surface, they found they had lost contact with the tow ship, and the navigation system had completely failed. Helpless, Armin opened the hatch. Armin climbed out and saw that the tow ship, just a short distance away, was brightly lit, but eerily devoid of people. He shouted for the crew but received no response. Armin and his team decided to risk moving closer to the tow ship and connect the two vessels with a cable when they were at the right distance. Then, Armin and Daphne boarded the tow ship together. They searched all the cabins but found no trace of any crew members. It was as if everyone had vanished into thin air. A sense of foreboding crept over them. Finally, in the captain's cabin, they discovered a shocking message from Keenan's computer. It revealed that the sun had mutated and that the sunrise would kill all life. The military had already instructed them to head to a nearby underground shelter. Seeing Keenan's anxious expression in the video, Armin and Daphne found it somewhat unbelievable, but they understood that this was definitely not one of Keenan's pranks. In a state of panic, they hurried back to the submarine and used the remaining power to head towards the island Keenan had mentioned. Not long after, Sem noticed an anomaly on the radar. An unidentified object was rapidly approaching them. Armin took a glance and surmised that it was definitely coming for them, so he decided to go full throttle. Soon, they arrived at the island with the shelter, but their relief was short-lived, as the pier was shrouded in darkness, filled with an eerie, oppressive atmosphere. As the group felt a sense of dread, massive waves suddenly surged from the sea. Moments later, a gigantic creature emerged from the water. Just moments ago, the sun became the most terrifying killer, as its gamma ray burst swept through Mercury and Venus and rapidly reached Earth. In an instant, it caused the near extinction of all life forms. A NATO nuclear submarine on a mission, being in the deep sea's lightless zone, narrowly escaped the catastrophe. They detected the scientists' submersible on radar and tracked it to this island. They also learned about this world-ending disaster from Keenan's video. At this point, only 3.5 hours remained until sunrise. Captain Irene immediately ordered everyone to split up and search for the exact location of the shelter. But as they ventured deeper, a hellish scene unfolded before their eyes. Corpses lay scattered everywhere, with severe burn marks on their bodies. Only then did they realize that all the island's residents were likely dead. Just as they felt utterly hopeless, Commander Umut suddenly received a report from his subordinates, saying they had found a survivor in a bank. They rushed over at once. After a field diagnosis by the medic, it was found that the survivor had weak breathing and severe internal bleeding, with minimal chances of survival. Armin hurriedly asked where the shelter was, but they couldn't understand each other, making it impossible to get any useful information from the survivor. As Armin continued trying to communicate, Umut suddenly drew his pistol and ended the survivor's life. The loud gunshot made Armin's head buzz. Regaining his senses, Armin grabbed Umut and demanded to know why he did that. But Umut argued that the situation was critical and they couldn't waste time on someone useless. With only 2 hours left until sunrise, Umut requested Irene to order all crew members back to the submarine. However, scientist Daphne didn't want to give up because her fiancé was also in the shelter on this island. She wanted to ask the soldiers to help search for him, but Umut flatly refused, unwilling to waste manpower on something he deemed pointless. Helpless, Armin had to ask Irene for another half hour. Then they urgently headed towards the island's interior. Meanwhile, Sem and Felix were tasked with repairing the island's transformer. After some work, they managed to restore the power. The town's broadcast system automatically began playing the shelter notifications. Daphne and Armin thus learned the exact location of the shelter, but when they arrived at the bunker deep in the mountains, they were devastated to find it had also turned into a place of death. Everyone had become cold corpses. Daphne's fiancé was lying on the ground, still holding the phone with which he had been messaging her. Daphne was instantly overwhelmed with grief. However, with sunrise approaching, Daphne and Armin had to compose themselves and quickly head back to the pier. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers still in the bank became greedy and wanted to take all the cash from the vault. This scene was witnessed by the squad leader, and a conflict immediately broke out. The chief engineer, hearing the commotion, also rushed to the scene, but just then, the town's power was suddenly restored, and the vault's automatic doors closed instantly. The chief engineer and a few others were trapped inside, and the only person who knew the code, the survivor, was already dead. Their comrades outside couldn't open the door, seeing that the outer iron door was about to lock as well. The chief engineer ordered the remaining soldier to escape quickly. With no other choice, the soldier watched helplessly as his comrades were completely sealed inside. Soon after, Irene and the others learned of this from the soldier, but with sunrise imminent, they had to abandon the rescue. Umut was furious. He believed that if it hadn't been for Daphne and the others insisting on searching the island, the tragedy wouldn't have occurred. A vengeful thought formed in Umut's mind. Irene quickly issued the order to submerge, but Daphne and Armin hadn't returned yet, and their companions wanted to request more time to wait. But the furious Umut blamed the death of his comrades on the scientists and had no intention of caring about the fate of Daphne and Armin. Armin and Daphne arrived just as Umut is about to close the hatch. However, Umut pretended not to see them and turned to lock the hatch. As the submarine was about to submerge, Armin jumped onto the hatch and began pounding on it with his hands. The noise from above caught Irene's attention, but Umut insisted that these people would only cause extra trouble, leaving Irene in a dilemma. After the team's desperate pleas, Irene's daughter, Yanka, finally opened the hatch, allowing Armin and Daphne to enter the submarine.
Bugün benim denizcilerim öldü. Kardeşlerim. Neden? Çünkü senin arkadaşın bir hayaletin peşinden gitmek istedi. Bunu hiçbir zaman unutmayacağım.
The atmosphere inside the submarine became particularly tense due to the arrival of the scientist team. Fortunately, the kind-hearted Yanka remained unaffected. She explained various rules to the newcomers, who were aboard a military submarine for the first time, and settled them near the torpedo bay. The scientists' daily job was to clean the toilets. Although they were somewhat unhappy about this, at least they were temporarily safe. However, this old submarine was already fraught with danger. Before anyone could catch their breath, a piercing alarm suddenly sounded. It was clear that a problem had arisen in some part of the submarine. Armin identified the issue as a hydraulic system rupture based on the smoke in the pipes. Irene immediately ordered everyone to help the helmsman steer. After some emergency repairs, the auxiliary system was successfully activated, and the submarine slowly stabilized. Irene was impressed by Armin's skilled operation. Upon inquiry, he learned that Armin had experience in building submarines. The small submersible used by the scientist team was actually developed and built by Armin. Since the original chief engineer was likely deceased, this important position had no suitable replacement. After a series of careful evaluations, Irene finally decided to appoint Armin as the new chief engineer, but since they were outsiders, this appointment, which should have gone to Alton, left him feeling disgruntled. Alton says he's been in the Navy for 15 years and he'd never take orders from a stranger. Considering that the only way to survive the apocalypse is to stick together, Armin was prepared to let the matter rest. However, Alton became increasingly overbearing, and he started bullying Felix, who was cleaning the toilets. In front of everyone, when Sem tried to intervene, Alton grabbed him by the neck.
Arkadaşlarım da korktu, sizin yüzünüzden oldu oğlum. Böyle işte. Tamam mı?
The scientists were no match for the soldiers and were quickly overpowered, but Daphne grew angrier by the minute. Just a day ago, she had been a highly respected scientist. Now, how had she become a lamb to the slaughter? So, Daphne told Armin about the situation. They went to the captain's cabin to ask Irene to properly discipline the unruly soldiers. However, Irene was dismissive, believing that his soldiers would never behave so outrageously. But to ease everyone's tension, Irene agreed to a face-to-face confrontation. While Armin and Alton were having a friendly yet deep conversation, Felix saw a suspicious-looking soldier in the corridor. Felix felt something was seriously wrong upon seeing the soldier's uneasy demeanor. When Felix looked at him questioningly, Boris openly spread his hand, revealing that his fingers were hooked into a grenade's pull ring. It was clear he intended to take everyone down with him. Felix quickly reported this situation to everyone in the meeting. Areni was instantly alarmed and hurried to Boris, sternly ordering him to drop his weapon, but Boris was clearly unhinged, ignoring Areni's commands. Seeing this, Umut immediately drew his pistol. At Areni's command, he would not hesitate to take Boris down, but Areni wanted to make one last attempt. He climbed into the cabin to persuade Boris not to do anything foolish. However, Boris's face only showed a bizarre smile. Boris told Areni that if God wanted everyone to perish, they should follow his will. Areni was stunned by these words. After Areni's earnest and heartfelt persuasion, Boris still showed no signs of calming down. Left with no choice, Areni decided to suddenly close the hatch and bolt it from the inside, ensuring the safety of everyone outside. Just as Areni was about to try and change Boris's heart with his kindness, Boris suddenly saluted him. Boris then detonated the grenade without hesitation. Kind-hearted Areni lost his life in vain. The explosion's shockwave tore a hole in the bow, and a torrent of seawater began rushing in. If not dealt with immediately, everyone would be doomed to a watery grave, and the situation became extremely dire. There was no time for the group to grieve. In the frantic struggle, they tried to seal the breach, but it was futile, and the submarine continued to depressurize rapidly. Sem was also very anxious about this. Alton chose this moment to pick a fight. Alton grabbed Sem by the throat and berated him once again, but fortunately, Felix was nearby to intervene. Alton left after throwing out a harsh threat. Amidst the chaos, the emergency response team arrived on the scene. The water ingress was temporarily relieved with the concerted efforts of the team, but everyone knew that as they descended further, the breach would inevitably widen again. The only solution was to send experienced divers outside the submarine to weld the hull. Luckily, the current depth was only 60 meters, theoretically within human endurance limits for water pressure, but who would be willing to undertake such a dangerous task? To save everyone's lives, Armin was the first to volunteer. However, another person was needed to help carry the welding equipment. While everyone is in a dilemma, Yanka bravely accepts the mission. Despite just losing her father, Yanka wiped away her tears and threw herself into the mission. They donned their diving gear and began flooding the airlock. Once the pressure equalized, they smoothly opened the hatch. By now it's pitch black in the deep sea. In front of the enormous nuclear submarine, the two human figures appeared minuscule. They quickly swam to the breach location, but just as they were about to weld the steel plate, no one noticed a strange black shadow flashing behind them. Yanka, who was on guard, was about to check the welding progress when a gaping maw suddenly appeared, startling her and causing her to inhale a mouthful of seawater. Moreover, the only keepsake from her father slipped from her hand. Yanka hurried to chase after it, but her swimming speed could not match the sinking necklace. When Yanka tried to return, she realized she was already far from the nuclear submarine. Through her goggles, she saw that the surroundings were pitch black, as if she were trapped in an invisible prison. Meanwhile, Armin was still nervously working on the final task. He glanced at his watch and saw there were only 2.5 minutes left until the scheduled time, but Yanka was nowhere to be seen. He frantically searched with his flashlight and finally spotted Yanka, floundering 30 meters below. With great effort, Armin swam to Yanka's side and used the previously placed glowing markers on the submarine to navigate. With only 30 seconds remaining, they had to quickly return to the nuclear submarine. Inside the submarine, their companions were anxiously waiting. Even the usually composed Umut had become restless. Seconds ticked by. Just when everyone feared the worst, the airlock transmitted a familiar call.
Suyu tahliye ediyoruz. Hava tahsini açın.
The exhausted Armin and Yanka finally returned safely. Although everyone breathed a sigh of relief, their survival crisis was not fully resolved. The welding could only temporarily slow the influx of seawater, but as the depth increased, the immense pressure could still tear open the breach. For now, they could only navigate at the slowest speed and reach a nearby naval base after sunset for comprehensive repairs. Thus, the nuclear submarine, carrying humanity's last hope, set off once again. After a day of sailing, they finally arrived at the Iskenderun naval base that night. To their disappointment, the dock was completely deserted. The soldiers had no choice but to conduct a thorough search of the base buildings. In an auditorium, They found a dense mass of corpses, and an emergency evacuation plan was still playing on the projector. It was clear that they hadn't had time to implement their escape plan before everyone was killed by the sunlight. The soldiers' hearts were heavy, but in the face of natural disasters, no one could do anything. They could only bury their fallen comrades with the highest military honors. Even Umut, who was accustomed to life and death, couldn't help but experience hallucinations in the face of such a tragedy. Umut clearly saw a little girl lying among the corpses, opening her eyes and looking at him, but when he turned to look again, there was no trace of the girl. Meanwhile, Felix, who stayed behind on the submarine, noticed something strange. Why was there a flashlight in an unoccupied cabin? As Felix approached to take a closer look, a man in black suddenly appeared, knocked him down, and fled. Felix quickly followed, but the agile figure took a few large strides and leaped out of the submarine. Felix called for the others to join the chase. They finally cornered the figure in a corridor. However, the ordinary Navy soldiers were no match for the man in black, who swiftly knocked them to the ground. Felix continued the chase alone into the dining hall. Just as Felix was about to search the area, a gun was pressed to his neck. Surrounded by everyone, Hattasy remained completely calm. She was Air Force Intelligence Officer Hattasy. Seeing there was no escape, she calmly chose to surrender. An angry Umut decided to interrogate her thoroughly, but no matter how much he threatened, Hattasy responded with calm indifference.
Je ne sais pas. I don't know.
This unyielding attitude nearly drove Umut to lose his mind, his furious roars echoing through the cabin. Seeing no progress in the interrogation, Felix decided to investigate the spot where he was attacked. He searched the nearby bunks and finally found an empty can and a uniform with a NATO insignia hidden in a compartment. Faced with this evidence, Hattasy finally revealed the truth. She had been the first to discover the sun's anomaly and had thought of a way to survive before anyone else. She had secretly hidden aboard the mission submarine. Originally, she only came out to search for food when everyone else was resting, but this time, Felix had spotted her. Umut clearly did not believe Hattasy's explanation, suspecting she was a spy from an enemy country. Unexpectedly, Hattasy claimed that during her time hiding on the submarine, she had discovered everyone's secrets. Areni is the most likely real spy because he once contacted someone from the outside. Hearing this, Yanka immediately stepped forward, ready to get rough. "How dare you slander my deceased father?" But Hattasy remained fearless and suggested they search the captain's quarters. With a mix of doubt and determination, Yanka and Umut headed to the captain's quarters. After some searching, they discovered a notebook hidden in a secret compartment of a box. The notebook contained the names of the entire scientific team. They were supposed to have only coincidentally met Armin and the others, so why were their detailed profiles recorded here? Yanka wanted more information from Hattasy, but her response was still "I don't know." Frustrated, Umut decided to hang Hattasy up, planning to make a decision once they uncovered the truth. At this point, Hattasy revealed an important piece of information. She claimed that the scientist Daphne was highly suspicious. Hattasy offered her expertise as an intelligence officer to help them. Umut still did not trust her. Unbeknownst to him, Daphne had already sneaked into the base's cyber intelligence room. She took out her satellite phone, attempting to connect it to the computer, but failed. What secrets could this seemingly harmless scientist be hiding? Meanwhile, two soldiers on the submarine suddenly began vomiting and experiencing severe diarrhea. Felix and Armin suspected they had contracted some infectious disease. Just as Umut was about to order their isolation, biologist Sem identified the real cause. The two soldiers had just consumed a large amount of food found at the base. Exposure to sunlight had altered the atomic structure of the food. Not only had it lost all nutritional value, but it had also become toxic to humans. Only the original submarine food remained safe. This meant that external supplies were nearly useless, and the submarine's food stock would only last for another week. The survivors now faced an even graver problem. They would either be killed by sunlight or starve to death. Umut refused to accept this and gathered all the soldiers, ordering a thorough search of the entire base to find uncontaminated food. But the situation seemed even worse than they had imagined. Felix discovered a large stockpile of canned goods in a warehouse. Logically, metal packaging should effectively block out sunlight, but Armin found that every single can had spoiled. Daphne couldn't accept this result. An entire warehouse of canned food, and not one can was edible. After randomly sampling a few more cans, she fell into deeper despair. The radio echoed with the voices of other soldiers, confirming that all the food at the base was completely inedible. Armin, unwilling to give up, continued searching. Sem seemed to have accepted the reality. He would rather die at sunrise than witness the horror of humans turning on each other once the food ran out. Meanwhile, Umut ultimately decided to cooperate with Hatasi. By searching Daphne's name, they discovered a shocking secret. A year ago, Daphne and her team of scientists had begun underwater exploration. Their real project was to build a habitat suitable for human life on the seabed. To counteract the threats posed by the sun's mutation, could it be that the authorities had known about the sun's anomaly all along but kept it hidden from the public? Just as Umut was about to confront Daphne, a sudden roaring sound diverted everyone's attention. They looked up in disbelief to see a plane cutting through the night sky. Is it possible that there are other survivors in the world? Fans of Into the Night would recognize that this was the plane piloted by the survival team. They had been flying east to west around the globe to avoid the sunrise. Umut and Hatasi quickly returned to the cyber intelligence room, hoping to use NATO's satellite system to get detailed information about the plane. What they didn't know was that gamma rays had already destroyed all artificial satellites. All communication methods, except for the radio, had failed. Although they couldn't reach the pilot, Hatasi managed to lock onto the plane's position in real time using radar. She found that it was flying at an altitude of 9,753 meters at a speed of 800 kilometers per hour and would soon land at Brussels Airport. Armin speculated that they were refueling. As long as they continued flying west, the plane would eventually pass over the base again, but no one expected the plane to suddenly change course and head east. Could it be that they had found a usable refuge? Armin quickly asked Hatasi to send a radio message, but Umut immediately stopped her. In his view, making contact with unknown entities could pose a significant threat.
Belki bize yardımcı olurlar. Belki bizim bilmediğimiz bir şey biliyorlardır. Belki yemekleri vardır. Bundan bahsediyorum.
Kim olduklarını anlamadan, öğrenmeden iletişime geçmek yok.
Kim olduklarını anlayalım, öğrenelim, iletişime geçelim diyorum zaten
Ben personelimin hayatını hiç kimsenin hayatını tehlikeye atamam. Kimliği belirsiz hedeftir. Yaklaşırsa vururum. Nokta.
Armin and Umut erupted into a fierce argument over their differing opinions. In the end, Umut declared that the submarine would dive in 15 minutes. If you want to stay alive, pack up and get ready to board. Although the others were somewhat resentful, they couldn't change Umut's decision. As the control panels lit up, the Doomsday submarine once again plunged into the depths of the sea. However, Armin keenly noticed that Daphne seemed emotionally distressed. After questioning her, Daphne revealed that Sem had grown weary of living and chose to stay on the dock to await sunrise. Armin hurriedly donned his diving suit to rescue Sem, but everyone knew it was already too late. At that moment, Sem was calmly sitting on the beach. He took out his passport, perhaps the only proof of his existence in this world. Watching the faint glow of dawn on the horizon, Sem walked slowly toward the sea. At the moment of sunrise, Sem's smile was fixed forever. Hatasi used her skilled hacking techniques to finally locate the plane she saw last night. She saw the plane parked at an airport in Bulgaria. Could it be that there's a coveted refuge there? Just as everyone was wondering, a man's voice suddenly came through the radio. He repeatedly said in Spanish, "This is a new home created by survivors, located underground with ample food supplies. Those who hear this broadcast are welcome to seek refuge here." He then provided specific latitude and longitude coordinates. Everyone fell into deep thought after listening, and then they all focused their gaze on Umut. Now that they've received news of 2 suspected shelters, which one is more trustworthy? After some consideration, Umut finally made a decision. That was to go to Bulgaria, as there was a NATO refuge base he was familiar with there. The appearance of the escape plane also confirmed that the base must still be in usable condition. However, Daphne did not agree. Daphne questioned Umut's decision in front of everyone. She also believed that the soldiers should no longer carry any guns since they were fleeing. Not going to war. Yanka listened to Daphne's stupid comments and she was so angry she almost laughed. Fortunately, Umut didn't bother to argue with her. He went back to the submarine to continue investigating the notebook left by Irene. In the hidden compartment of the back cover, he found a piece of paper with a mysterious code consisting of 8 numbers and letters. Could this be the mission password for the submarine? Umut sent the soldiers away and then attempted to log in using the mysterious code. Unfortunately, he did not have access. At that moment, the headset beside him was filled with a garbled voice. Faintly, it seemed that someone was saying, "We are heading to Norway." Umut quickly gathered all the crew and ordered a course change to Norway. Everyone was puzzled by this. With the food on the ship already running low, why were they taking the longer route? To calm everyone down, Umut reluctantly revealed the truth. It turned out that he had just heard from the radio that the food at the Bulgarian refuge was completely exhausted, and there was a global seed vault in Svalbard, Norway. As long as they could obtain crop seeds from it and use soilless cultivation, they could solve the food shortage problem. But Defn still insisted on going to the mining area in Spain, as it was much closer than the other option. This led to another heated argument. Armin finally stepped in to mediate, suggesting that since Spain was on the way to Norway, they could stop there first to assess the situation before making a final decision. After a round of sarcastic remarks from Defn, Umut had no choice but to agree.
En bir arıza çıksın, senden bilirim.
After 2 days of sailing, the submarine finally arrived in Spain. To ensure the submarine's safety, Umut not only had the soldiers carry plenty of weapons but also arranged for 2 small boats to land. However, no one expected that even though they had made sufficient preparations in advance, they would still be in great danger. The port's broadcast kept playing information about the new home, with thoughtful signs pointing the way, and even cars ready for use. Daphne and Armin were delighted, believing that humanity still had kindness left. After just a few minutes of traveling, the group arrived at the mine, but the elevator could only take 5 people at a time. So Umut had to go down first with Armin, Daphne, and 2 other soldiers. What they didn't know was that they were being watched through surveillance cameras. The elevator stopped at a mine entrance, and Armin led the group inside. But after walking for a long time, they didn't see a single person. Meanwhile, their companions above discovered that the elevator had stopped running. Sensing danger, Yanka immediately realized something was wrong and sent soldiers to find another entrance. Just as Umut and the others noticed something was off, someone suddenly took one of the soldiers hostage. Before they could react, a large group of miners surrounded them. It turned out that this was a huge trap from the start, and there was no refuge at all. The surviving miners kept spreading false information to lure other survivors into their trap. Armin still wanted to negotiate, but Umut flatly refused. He pulled out his gun and started shooting. The hostage soldier was killed instantly. A fierce fight broke out. The mine was thrown into chaos, and Daphne took the opportunity to escape. Hearing the gunfire, those above rushed to the nearby control room, only to find that the wires had been deliberately cut. Felix tried to repair them, but he was at a loss for where to start. Knowing the urgency of the situation, Yanka put on gloves and slid down the elevator cable. Inside the mine, both sides were still fighting fiercely, but in the darkness, the miners clearly had the advantage. Soon, another soldier was knocked down and killed by the miners. Desperate and lost, Daphne stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Several unfortunate survivors were hanging in midair, with some mutilated human limbs nearby. Daphne was almost scared to death. One of the survivors, who hadn't died, called out to her for help.
Se nourrit. Nous mangeons. I'm so pleased.
At that moment, a flashlight beam shone over, making Daphne think she was doomed. Fortunately, the flashlight's owner was Yanka. Seeing the reinforcements arrive, Daphne wanted to rescue the unfortunate survivors. Unbeknownst to her, a miner was slowly approaching them. In the nick of time, Yanka reacted first and bravely fought with the miner. Yanka and Daphne used all their strength to push the miner onto a protruding wooden stake. Meanwhile, Armin and Umut were still struggling under the miner's assault. Just as Umut was about to be killed by a hammer, he saw his handgun nearby. He grabbed it and shot the miner in front of him. Hearing the gunshot, the other miners temporarily halted. They managed to reunite at the elevator entrance, and Umut quickly locked the iron door to block the pursuing miners. Armin found a new control panel, wedged the switch with a shovel, and leaped onto the elevator at the last moment as it ascended. After surviving, the men finally make it back to the surface and head for the harbor without stopping. But another problem arose at the critical moment. The companions soon realized that Armin and Daphne had not returned. Felix reached into his pocket and found the car keys on him. Going back to deliver the keys would be a death sentence. Umut had no choice but to order the others to retreat first, while he stayed behind with a few men to wait for Armin and Daphne. Meanwhile, Armin and Daphne were running for their lives, with a group of ferocious miners in hot pursuit. Just as they were about to reach the port, the soldiers prepared to fire. Daphne tripped over a mooring rope and was captured and taken hostage by the miners. Armin pleaded with the soldiers not to shoot, but Umut was not going to negotiate with these beasts. Despite Armin's loud pleas, Umut calmly pulled the trigger. Daphne died just like that. Grief-stricken, Armin wanted to fight Umut, but Yanka knocked him out with the butt of her rifle. The survivors, lucky to be alive, returned to the nuclear submarine. Now, they had only one option left: to head to the underground seed vault in Norway. Umut, however, seemed unconcerned by the chaos around him. He kept trying the mysterious code left by Irene, hoping to uncover the great secret behind the disaster. After repeatedly trying different combinations, Umut finally succeeded in logging in. Inside, there was only one email from NATO to Irene, but one glance was enough for Umut to understand the whole truth. He immediately gathered all the crew and revealed the secret. It turned out that the reason they managed to avoid the disaster and happened to meet the team of scientists led by Daphne was because everything had been prearranged. The real mission of the submarine was to rescue this group of scientists. That's why Irene recorded all their names in his notebook after the mission was completed. This also meant that NATO had known about the impending disaster long before it happened, but the high-ranking officials only cared about saving themselves, not the lives of the lower-ranking soldiers. As Umut angrily condemned the officials' actions, Armin suddenly charged at him, headbutting him and then throwing a punch. Armin blamed Umut entirely for Daphne's death. Fortunately, the soldiers nearby restrained Armin in time, preventing the situation from escalating. The rest of the scientific team were clearly unaware of the so-called secret mission. Even Armin looked completely baffled after hearing it, but due to his attack on the commander, Armin was forcibly confined. No one expected Armin to turn the tables under such unfavorable circumstances. He accidentally discovered that the submarine was missing 2 missiles. Armin remembered that while they were in Bulgaria, there had been an abnormal alarm on the submarine. The only explanation was that Umut had secretly launched the 2 missiles without informing most of the crew. So, who was the target of the attack? Those who have seen Into the Night would remember the scene where the plane was blown up. Armin used this to lure Umut into negotiations. Since only the scientists knew the soilless cultivation techniques, Armin decided to take a drastic approach. Either they all starve to death, or Umut's 2 soldiers pay with their lives for the deaths of Daphne and Sem. To save the lives of all the crew, Umut had no choice but to compromise, but he still fell into a trap. The conversation in the cabin had been clearly broadcasted to all the crew members. Soon, everyone knew that Umut was willing to sacrifice his comrades to save himself. Umut's credibility took a devastating hit. Led by Yanka, the soldiers stripped Umut of his command. Poor Umut, who only wanted to save everyone, was ultimately despised by the very people he wanted to protect. The Doomsday submarine continued its journey to Norway. Shortly after, they received a strange call. The man on the other end claimed to be Armin's father, Assel. Assel revealed a shocking secret during the call. Humanity had not been completely wiped out. Some high-ranking officials and wealthy individuals were now living on an island in the Indian Ocean. It was the only safe haven after the apocalypse. Armin survived the disaster because his father had begged Daphne to take him along for the research. Finally, NATO arranged for the Yakamoz S-245 submarine to rescue them. Armin was stunned by this news, unable to tell if it was true or false. He had barely seen his father and knew nothing about his identity. To be safe, they decided to continue to the underground seed vault and resolve the food crisis first before searching for the island Assel mentioned. Finally, the submarine arrived safely at the Svalbard port. Upon landing, they discovered a plane already parked there. Upon closer inspection, Armin confirmed that it was the plane they had been tracking. He armed himself and followed it quietly. Soon, he found the legendary Doomsday cellar, but as he entered, he saw Ayaz from Into the Night about to execute the informant soldier. Armin hurried forward to stop him, but Ayaz quickly turned the gun on him.
Bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin.
The 2 storylines converged perfectly here. In a daze, Armin felt like he was lying at the bottom of the sea, with countless memories flashing through his mind. Meanwhile, chaos erupted inside the submarine. Just moments ago, Alton had shockingly discovered an unidentified missile rapidly approaching on the radar. The plot of Yakamoz S-245 ends here.